We previously left off looking at a time frame, a series of conflicts known as the Crusades. And to an extent, when we look at the spread of disease, specifically the bubonic plague, it's going to deal with some of the consequences of the Crusades. Now, the Crusades, as we've seen, increased interactions between East and West, and the conquests of a group of people called the Mongols, which we'll see the Mongols when we get to East Asia. They protected the trade routes that flowed between these two areas. Now, safe passage in terms of trade routes not only meant that goods and ideas would flow freely, but that disease could run unchecked. Now, the steppes of Eurasia. Often, Europe and Asia are combined into one landmass known as Eurasia. The steppes of Eurasia have been the center of plague outbreaks for centuries due to environmental conditions that served as a breeding ground for the bacterium that transmits it. Rodent hosts, such as rats, are effective carriers, but fleas are the most common transmitters of the plague to humans. Now, fleas will vomit bacilli onto humans, and then they'll be carried into the lymph nodes, where they will multiply and cause swelling. The swells can grow to egg size or apple size, and then the rest of the body's organs are affected. It's unclear exactly where specifically the plague started, but we know it moved out of the Eurasian steppes into Europe, Iran, the Middle East, Egypt, and the Arabian Peninsula. The disease was mainly centered in the Far and Middle East until a Mongolian horde arrived at the gates of the Genoese city of Kaffa. Kaffa is located on the Black Sea, and it's controlled by the Italian city-state of Genoa. Genoa is one of those places that rose in prominence because of the Crusades. Now, a mysterious illness began to sweep through the soldiers of this Mongol horde, and it began to kill them off. The leader decided to catapult his dead soldiers over the city walls. That's what you see here. The Mongols catapulting soldiers over the walls. They thought the stench would kill the residents. But this leader ended up sending the plague into the city. Now, Kaffa is positioned at the crossroads of maritime trade between East and West, and it's well connected to the trade routes that entered Western Europe. So merchants from Constantinople, Genoa, and Venice, they fled home, and they brought it into these Western European cities. And by the time the locals figured out what was going on, the disease had already spread. Now, clearly, we have negative effects of something that's nicknamed the Black Death. The papal explanation, meaning when we take a look at the religious explanation or the Christian explanation, as far as Western Europe is concerned, 1/10 of the population of England survived. Pope Clement VI believed it was divine wrath, God's will. However, he also listened to prominent physicians who advised him to surround himself with lit candles at all times. Now, the Pope ended up surviving, and it's probably because the constant heat kept the fleas that carry the disease from reaching his body. In Avignon, France, in 1349, there were so many people that were killed that there was no place to bury the dead, and the bodies are exposed in the streets and they're infecting others. The Pope ended up consecrating the Rhone River, and he threw infected bodies into the Rhone so the current could carry them away. Now, in the Middle East, in the Muslim world, there's more of an understanding of how the disease was spread from person to person, so they tried to isolate as much as possible. Another negative effect is a rise in what we would call anti-Semitism. Now, the Jewish population initially is not affected as much because within Western Europe, Jews already lived in walled-off ghettos. They lived in segregated portions of their cities, and they controlled who was allowed in and out for business purposes. There were also laws within the Jewish faith that espoused cleanliness, such as washing hands before eating and after using the bathroom. Because of this, And because of rumors that Jews had poisoned wells and rivers, many believed that the Jews were the cause of the plague, and pogroms took place. Pogroms, blaming the Jews, attacking the Jews. The worst pogrom is in Strasbourg, Germany, where several hundred were burned to death and the rest were expelled from the city. These pogroms came after the Pope had issued proclamations forbidding violent actions against Jewish populations in Christian countries. Now it's believed that Europe lost at least 1/3 of its total population, and the conservative estimates are that 25 million died. When the plague hit, wealthy aristocrats often left their city homes and they boarded themselves up in their country estates. However, one factor that affects the spread of the plague is the number of rat colonies. In cities, there are fewer colonies per household, while in the countryside, the ratio is higher. Location doesn't exactly save one from infection, but we do know total isolation is really the only measure. It actually takes until after 1500 for Europe's population to regain its pre-plague levels. We're talking 150 years for its population to fully recover. And this painting, you can see the devastation. Death is coming for people. You can certainly understand the fear that the residents of Western Europe operated under. Now, were there any positives to be gleaned from this? Believe it or not, there were a few. It might seem unusual to mention a labor shortage as a positive, but it does lead to an increase in wages. It was noted that there was a shortage of servants, craftsmen, and agricultural workers, so the ones who survived had significant bargaining power. If you're at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, you can bargain for better wages. This also coincides with a general weakening of the landed classes, and landlords are forced to accept lower rents. So peasants have more spending power due to decreased obligations. Now, those who were positioned to do so and take advantage of this are going to start to buy more luxury goods like fancy clothes, and the increase in wealth will lead to better diets and better health for the survivors. An interesting side effect is that in Western Europe, upward mobility will occur on a scale never before seen, and those on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum will benefit the most because they had more room to move up the ladder. This meant that the peasants and residents in general are going to become open to the concept of competition, and they'll realize that a strong work ethic will allow them to turn a profit. This will lay the foundations for the free market economics of later centuries. Now, with a reduction in the workforce, we want to get the same amount of work done with fewer people. Western Europe will start to look towards labor-saving inventions as a tool to accomplish this. Now, this attitude of we want labor-saving inventions, we want to get the same amount of work done with fewer people, we want to compete, a strong work ethic can help you turn a profit. This is going to lay the groundwork for why the Industrial Revolution took root in Northern and Western Europe beginning in the late 1700s. Now, this certainly gives us an indication of the spread of the plague, and you can see that it's the late 1300s into the 1350s. So it kind of begins. We see the Black Sea here from south to north. Center of uprisings. Pogroms are taking place. Now, this model gives us a better idea of where it all began. We think that Pagan, in what's now China, was the center of it. Then it spread into more East Asia. This is Kaffa. The world population, due to this spread, dropped by about 1/4 to 1/3. There were about 450 million people worldwide. There were 350 to 75 million left when all was said and done. feudalism is really going to begin to disappear in Western Europe. When the population of these places recover, life will regress somewhat. But you can see that because of trade, protecting trade routes means that disease can easily spread. It's as true in the present day as it was in the past, and there really weren't any city centers that were spared from this awful bubonic plague.